the parallel I've drawn, and I know I'm not the only one that drew it, it reminded me a lot of the Israelis blowing up all the members of Hamas with the cell phones and the communication devices. Well organized, planned in advance, and unbelievably well timed and successful. We had the same kind of thing. I mean, they from all reports, they planned this for the last 18 months. They were able to secretly shuttle in these drones and these prepared shelters that with the roofs that popped off on remote control, the drones launched in close proximity to the targets. And for what I understand is for a couple of $100 drone multiplied by a large factor, they were able to do about $7 billion in damage to Russian aircraft. That's pretty darn impressive. But does it mean that Ukraine will win the war? Headline in the Wall Street Journal op-ed piece by Bernard Henry Levy: drone attack shows why Ukraine will win this war. And something suggests to me that you're not going to agree with Mr. Levy on that one.
Oh man, no, I definitely not. Hadn't seen that one. We'll definitely go look for it after we get off the air here.
Yeah.
But that is sheer fantasy. But let's first of all focus on what happened, because you said, and by all accounts, and I'm certainly in agreement, that this was a spectacularly executed operation on its own right, because it was done for such a long period of time. It was done with the cooperation of many, at least so far it's been reported, actual Russian citizens as well, people they recruited, et cetera, got to turn and to help Russia inside, knowing what they were doing. And then to keep it all secret for that long. And then to have it on multiple locations, hence the name Spiderweb, because it was all these different links to get together. And then to have the sophistication, the technological savvy to be able to get through any kind of attempt to block signals, for example, from the Russian side, to have it without being intercepted so that Russia didn't know what was going on. All that together was just really, really successful. But then we have to get to the consequence of it, and other than being a real, bloody eye or black eye for Putin, it's not going to have any impact on the front line in the war that's going on. Where, by the way, overnight, Russia also continues to have significant progress going forward in the Sumy region. No one wants to talk about that on the Ukraine side because they want to bask in the glory of this. But the bottom line is, what does this gain you? And so far, I've seen that it has angered the Russian side. It has made more of the senior people in the Kremlin. And by the way, there's lots of reports that there is a lot of debate within the upper echelon of the Russian Kremlin and their leadership, that they want to respond much, much stronger than Putin does. Putin still apparently is looking for some kind of non-provocative, that's not going to escalate, better phrase, that's not going to escalate it and get the NATO drawn in, but it's also strong enough. And apparently they haven't come to a conclusion because they haven't said almost anything about it. But yeah, it ain't going to win the war for the Ukraine side, no matter what anybody wants.
Yeah, I actually fully expected an almost immediate retaliation. I don't know if you read the same thing I've read, where you get your sources, but they had amassed about 50,000 additional troops on the border there. The Russians did. I figured that they would just be unleashed into Ukraine and add to the already established zones that Russia is controlling right now.
Well, what we've seen, though, is that Russia is very strategically minded and patient, and they have been from the outset, and they have done things that issue near-term setbacks in order to get something big later on. For example, in the Kherson area, they willingly withdrew all their forces across the Dnieper River and surrendered all that territory to the Ukraine side because they calculated that they couldn't hold it, knowing that it would be a huge media victory for the other side and they would get the territory, but it would preserve combat power for later on. And it played out that way. Is that helped Russia win the Battle of Bakhmut later on? This place here, those troops had been there already. They're already part of this northern offensive that Russia has probably already started. So they're not going to, rush into a new fight here that's different than the slow pace they have, because they want to preserve their troops and maximize the firepower to inflict casualties on the Ukraine side. So they're not going to change that. The only thing that might come is maybe some big, spectacular missile strikes into strategic targets where they haven't hit before. Maybe an Oreshnik missile, something that literally no one can stop at this point. But there may not be any of that either. In fact, one of Putin's former advisors went on the air almost immediately on a Western show and said that he didn't think there would be any because he said, "Look, this is like the 100th time a Russian airbase has been attacked." In the last 2 years, it's just the first time it's had this kind of success. So it's embarrassment, but it's not going to take their eye off the ball of what they're doing. So that could be how it's going to work out.
The broader implications of the success of this attack kind of have me worried. First off, I guess we have to view this through the lens of how this illustrates the changing dynamic of warfare. Much in the same way, usage of drones over the past military conflicts we've been in, since drones have been used, sort of reduce the need for manned aircraft. I mean, if you can send a $1 million drone in with no man in it and it can successfully complete a bombing operation, that's a lot better use of your resources than sending in a multi-billion-dollar F-35 that's got a pilot in it that you got to worry about saving their lives. So that's one component. But this has me a little more worried from a domestic standpoint. A lot of concerns about China grabbing up all this land around our military bases. And I think it would be pretty damn easy in a country as free and as wide as our country for them to, maybe get a whole giant drone fleet and launch it whenever the hell they damn well please. Like, for example, when the lights go out the day they invade Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just China. And by the way, you don't even have to own any land, as Russia just demonstrated. You just have to have a truck. Just think, Russia is a lot more restrictive than the U.S. in terms of movement, though it's actually much more open than people think, and you saw the results of it there. But of course, here you can literally drive anywhere in our country, and I actually worry not as much about China, though that certainly is a big one on the front of the list. But something like we talk about getting into a conflict with the cartels in Russia, in Mexico. We talk about sending in the special forces like there's never going to be any consequence. But now we see that the opportunity here is so easy to do and so low cost. I fear that others may see what happened here and draw obvious conclusions. So I think that it's kind of like the genie's out of the bottle here, and man, we better be figuring out some kind of defense against this stuff as best we can right now.
Well, we saw that nut job throwing Molotov cocktails, obviously for political reasons. He hates the Jews and wants to kill all of them or something Looney Tunes like that. But also in the context of comments from the border security folks about the 2 million gotaways that we had no interaction. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they represent. Are they political? Are they perhaps cells that have formed and are just waiting for the orders to launch any particular given attack? I mean, that's a real problem for our country on a going forward basis.
Yes, it always is. That's one of the reasons I've always been such an advocate, no matter who's in the White House, that we need to have our secure borders. I've always said that whatever your immigration policy is, y'all figure that out. And whatever the Congress and the system of governments, whatever we agree to, whether everybody likes it or not, and they definitely won't, doesn't matter. But whatever the law is, abide by it and enforce it so that we keep ourselves safe, so that whatever the decisions are, we don't get anybody in like you're talking now where we don't even know who they are. And that's just an existing and a prevailing vulnerability of our country that we still have to some degree to this day.
All right, and let's return briefly back to Ukraine before we part company today. Daniel Davis, they still have a shortage of manpower. That has not solved the problem. Hasn't been solved in the week since we've talked last week. So that's the ongoing issue for Ukraine. I mean, successful drone strikes or not, they've got to keep guys on the front lines, and they have to have the hardware and equipment to be able to fight with the remaining people they have.
Well, yeah, and that's why the headline, like the one you cited in the Wall Street Journal, is embarrassing and just humiliating, because it doesn't even talk about what's actually going on the front line, which I mentioned in the Sumy area. It's continuing to go and forward. Another point to make on this big strike here is that the consequence of that also have to be considered. In Russia, a lot of them are calling this their Pearl Harbor moment. They got this strike and whatever. And then there's in the news I saw this morning before coming on your show is one of the writers in one of the op-eds of a military review in Russia said, this has been our Pearl Harbor. Now it's time for our Midway. So they do want some kind of a big strike in return. And as we've pointed out on your show many times, and you just addressed here, the manpower imbalance alone, plus all the weapons, ammunition, everything else, is still irrevocably and decisively on the Russian side. So these formations on the front are going to continue on no matter what happened 5,000 kilometers from the front.
Any hope of them sitting down? It sounds like every time we hear that they're going to sit down and have some sort of talk to resolve this, it never does happen, or nothing becomes of it. Russia,
Brian, one of the most puzzling and maddening things about this situation is they had the second face-to-face meeting between Russia and Ukraine yesterday in Istanbul. Both sides entered by giving positions that were further apart than they were the previous time, that they both knew the other side would categorically reject, and that's exactly the way it turned out. Because, and the bottom line is, neither side wants a negotiated settlement. And that sounds odd because you would think that the Ukraine side does, because they claim they do. The Russian side does. They claim they do. But you see that the Russians are like saying, yeah, if you agree to all these draconian terms, we'll stop fighting today, which means they have to withdraw from the territories where they still have some troops, et cetera. Demilitarization, denazification, all these things they won't do. Or we said we'll just keep fighting. And the Nebenzia, their UN Security Council ambassador, specifically said that at the UN Security Council a couple of days ago. But on the Ukraine side, you're like, wait a minute, you don't have anything to gain by this. If the negotiations fail, the offensive will continue on. And yet they sabotaged this so that there was no way the Russians would agree to it. And so we have to really ask, and it's an open question, what is the Ukraine and the Western European side trying to get done here?
A real quick question, because I know we're out of time. If let's say a miracle occurred and Ukraine said, okay, we'll agree to demilitarize, who would preside over? Who would do the oversight that would provide sufficient, satisfaction for the Russians that they did, in fact, demilitarize? Is that a UN function? Is that a NATO function? Is it a function of the Russians looking over it? I guess I'm just curious to how that would work functionally.
Russia actually has addressed part of that question by saying it needs to be neutral observers, not NATO, not Russia, but like the OSCE or even other entities from like maybe the Global South or something like that. So they actually have some working level issue on that, but it's not going to be U.S. and NATO. It's not going to be Russia and Belarus, et cetera. But I mean, I hope we get to the point to where we have to worry about that the fighting stops. Actually,
doesn't sound like we're anywhere near it right now. Daniel Davis, deep dive with Daniel Davis. Search for the podcast wherever you get it, and always tune in Tuesday at 8:30 for another great discussion. My friend, until next Tuesday, have a great week.
Always my pleasure. See you next week, Brian.
Take care, brother.